Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly mundane and refreshingly ordinary world of a cheetah who never quite figured out how to be impressive. Those spotted predators we imagine as lightning-fast killing machines, but our friend here spent most of his life missing targets and wondering why gazelles kept escaping. While nature documentaries make them look majestic, the truth is some cheetahs are just spectacularly average at being cheetahs. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tumble into existence like a wet tennis ball dropped from a great height, all limbs and confusion, blinking at a world that's far too bright and moving way too fast for someone who just figured out eyelids. The first thing you notice, once your vision stops swimming like a badly tuned television, is that everything is enormous. The grass towers above you like a green forest designed for giants, each blade casting shadows that could hide entire universes of things that might want to eat you. The Serengeti spreads before you like an endless carpet that someone forgot to vacuum, dotted with acacia trees that look like they're perpetually shrugging at the sky. It's the kind of landscape that makes you feel simultaneously significant and utterly insignificant, a philosophical crisis you're not nearly equipped to handle at roughly 30 minutes old. Your mother looms above you like a spotted mountain, all elegant lines and barely contained exhaustion. She gives you the kind of look reserved for surprise house guests who arrive during dinner, not unwelcome, exactly, but definitely unplanned and requiring immediate attention she's not sure she has the energy for. Her golden coat catches the morning light in ways that suggest she was designed by someone who actually knew what they were doing, unlike whoever was responsible for your current state of damp, wobbly confusion. Two siblings sprawl beside you, equally bewildered by the whole being alive situation. One is slightly larger and seems to have figured out the basic mechanics of breathing without conscious effort, an achievement you're still working on. The other appears to be in the same boat as you, if that boat is sinking, and no one remembered to bring life jackets. You regard each other with the mutual incomprehension of people who've just been thrust into a situation no one bothered to explain. The world smells like everything all at once. Wet earth and dry grass. The musky scent of your mother's fur. Something sharp and metallic that might be blood or might be fear, you're too new to tell the difference. Underneath it all is a smell you don't recognize yet, but will learn to associate with opportunity and terror in equal measure. The scent of prey animals who've just realized they're sharing the neighborhood with something designed to catch them. Your first attempt at movement goes about as well as you'd expect from someone whose nervous system is still figuring out which end is up. Your legs, all four of them, seem to belong to different people who haven't been properly introduced. The left front leg wants to go forward, the right rear leg has strong opinions about going backward, and the other two are apparently taking a coffee break. The result is less locomotion and more interpretive dance performed by someone who's never seen dancing before. Mother watches this display with the patient resignation of someone who's done this before and knows that enthusiasm is no substitute for competence. She makes a sound that might be encouragement or might be the cheetah equivalent of a sigh. It's hard to tell when you're still learning that sounds have meanings beyond loud and not loud. The sun climbs higher, turning the savannah into a furnace that seems designed to test your commitment to being alive. Your fur, what little you have of it, offers about as much protection as a cotton t-shirt in a blizzard. Everything is bright and hot and overwhelming, like someone turned the contrast up too high on reality. You close your eyes and discover that darkness is marginally better than sensory overload, though not by much. When you open them again, a Thompson's gazelle has wandered into view, grazing with the casual indifference of someone who hasn't noticed they're auditioning for lunch. It's your first glimpse of the food chain in action, though at this point, you're so far down the chain, you'd need a ladder to reach pathetic. The gazelle is small, elegant, and moves with a grace that makes your mother's hunting prowess look like showing off. It's also completely oblivious to your existence, which is probably for the best considering your current inability to pose a threat to anything more dangerous than a blade of grass. Your mother shifts slightly, a movement so subtle you almost miss it. But suddenly the air changes, charged with a tension you don't understand but feel in your bones. The gazelle's head snaps up, eyes wide with an alertness that wasn't there a moment before. For a heartbeat, predator and prey regard each other across the golden grass, locked in a dance as old as hunger itself. Then the gazelle bounds away in that peculiar pronking gait that makes it look like it's trying to high-five the sky, and the moment dissolves back into ordinary morning. Your mother settles back down with what might be disappointment or might be relief. You're not experienced enough to read the subtleties of cheetah facial expressions yet. This, you begin to understand in the dim, wordless way of very young things, is your inheritance. This world of grass and sky and creatures who run from you or chase you or ignore you entirely. This ecosystem where being fast matters, where being smart matters, where being lucky matters most of all. You're born into a story that's been playing out for millions of years, and somehow you're supposed to figure out your part without anyone handing you a script. Your siblings have begun the complex process of trying to stand up, which involves a lot of wobbling and falling down and making small, frustrated sounds. Watching them struggle makes you feel slightly better about your own complete lack of coordination, at least incompetence, loves company. The larger sibling manages to achieve something resembling vertical for approximately 3 seconds before gravity reasserts its authority and sends them tumbling back into the grass. By afternoon, you've mastered the art of staying upright for extended periods, though extended is relative when you're measuring in seconds rather than minutes. You've also discovered that hunger is a thing that exists, a gnawing emptiness that seems to have opinions about your life choices. Feeding involves a complex negotiation with your mother's patience and your siblings' similar needs, like trying to use a drinking fountain that 3 other people also need to use, except the fountain is warm and moves, and occasionally walks away when you're in the middle of drinking. The taste of milk is your first experience with something unambiguously good, rich, and warm, and satisfying in a way that makes the whole being alive project seem like it might work out after all. It's also your first lesson in competition, because there's only so much milk to go around, and your siblings have developed surprisingly strong opinions about who gets how much. Sibling rivalry, you discover, begins approximately 5 minutes after birth, and involves a lot more elbowing than you expected. As the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that would be breathtaking if you had any concept of beauty beyond not hungry and not falling down, you settle in for your first night in the world. The grass is softer than you expected, though everything is relative when you've only been conscious for 1 day. Your mother curves around you and your siblings like a spotted parenthesis, her breathing slow and steady in a way that suggests she's done this before and expects to wake up tomorrow. The night sounds begin as the day sounds fade, a changing of the guard between the creatures who own the daylight and those who prefer darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a lion roars, a sound so deep and powerful it seems to shake the ground beneath you. Your mother's breathing doesn't change, but you feel her muscles tense slightly, a reminder that even predators have things to fear. You close your eyes and listen to the symphony of the Serengeti night, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant calls of hyenas, the soft sounds of your family breathing. It's alien and overwhelming and completely outside anything your young brain is equipped to process, but it's also strangely comforting. This is your world now, with all its beauty and terror and endless complexity. Tomorrow, you'll begin the long process of learning to live in it. Tonight, you're content to simply exist, warm and fed, and surrounded by the scent of family. It's not much of an achievement. Existing is literally the minimum requirement for being alive, but it's a start. And in a world where being a cheetah means being very good at very specific things or being very dead, starting is more important than you know. Your first few weeks unfold like a nature documentary directed by someone with a sense of humor and a fondness for physical comedy. Each day brings new revelations about the fundamental difficulty of being a creature designed for speed when you can't yet manage to walk in a straight line without falling over your own paws. Walking, it turns out, is significantly more complicated than it looks when your mother does it. Your legs seem to have their own opinions about direction, often disagreeing with your brain's suggestions in ways that result in sudden, undignified contact with the ground. The grass, at least, is forgiving, though it has a tendency to get in your mouth at unexpected moments, giving you a diet rich in fiber and confusion. You practice pouncing with the concentrated focus of someone trying to solve calculus while riding a unicycle. Your targets are admirably diverse: shadows that move with the sun, your own tail, which seems to have a vendetta against you, patches of grass that look suspicious, and occasionally thin air that you're convinced was harboring something threateningly small just moments before you leaped at it. The pouncing technique itself is a work in progress. The theory seems sound, identify, target, crouch, spring forward with devastating accuracy, but the execution involves a lot more flailing and a lot less devastation than you'd hoped. Your landings range from survivable to embarrassing, with the occasional "how did I end up facing the wrong direction entirely?" thrown in for variety. Your siblings are going through the same learning process, which provides both comfort and competition. The larger one, who you've mentally nicknamed Show-Off for their irritating tendency to succeed at things slightly more often than you do, has already managed to catch their own tail twice. This achievement fills you with a mixture of admiration and sibling rivalry that you're too young to properly articulate, but old enough to feel deeply. The smaller sibling, meanwhile, has developed what might generously be called a unique approach to locomotion. They've discovered that rolling is often more effective than walking for getting from point A to point B, especially when point B is wherever gravity takes me. This strategy lacks dignity but scores points for efficiency, and you find yourself grudgingly respecting their willingness to embrace alternative solutions to the problem of movement. Mother demonstrates the art of hunting with the patience of a yoga instructor teaching toddlers. If yoga instructors had to worry about their students starving to death when they failed to master downward dog. Her movements flow like water, each step placed with a precision that seems almost casual, until you try to copy it and discover that casual precision is an oxymoron your body hasn't figured out yet. When she hunts, the world seems to slow down and speed up simultaneously. She becomes statue still, every muscle coiled with potential energy, and then explodes into motion so fluid and purposeful that it looks choreographed. The gazelle she's targeting, always a gazelle, because apparently that's what's for dinner in this neighborhood, doesn't seem to realize it's been selected until it's far too late to lodge a complaint. Your mother's relationship with killing appears to be refreshingly professional. She doesn't seem to take it personally, and neither, presumably, do the gazelles. It's just business, the kind of transaction that keeps the ecosystem running smoothly. Death is delivered quickly and efficiently, with no more drama than someone picking up groceries, except the groceries were running around moments before, and the shopping trip required a sprint that would make Olympic athletes weep with envy. Your own movements, by contrast, resemble water that's been dropped and is now splashing everywhere. When you try to mimic her hunting crouch, you look like someone attempting yoga poses they learned from a book written in a language they don't speak. Your attempts at stealth involve a lot of rustling grass and the occasional inadvertent noise that sounds like someone stepping on a squeaky toy. The day she decides you're ready to observe a real hunt is marked by your first genuine taste of meat, which turns out to be surprisingly anticlimactic. After weeks of milk being the only thing that made sense in your mouth, you expect something more dramatic from your introduction to the food that will define your entire existence. Instead, it tastes like meat, slightly warm, faintly metallic, with a texture that your teeth aren't quite sure what to do with yet. Your siblings attack their portions with enthusiasm that borders on violence, as if they're afraid the meat might escape if they don't eat it quickly enough. You approach yours more cautiously, partly because you're still figuring out how to tear and chew simultaneously, and partly because you're beginning to understand that this meal represents someone else's very bad day. The gazelle had been young, not much larger than you, and now it's dinner. This seems like the sort of thing you should have philosophical feelings about, but philosophy is difficult when you're 3 weeks old and still working on basic motor functions. Instead, you file it away under things to think about later when I'm not so busy learning to exist. Mother watches your first meal with the kind of attention she usually reserves for potential threats or promising hunting opportunities. You sense this is some kind of test, though you're not sure what the passing grade looks like. Eating meat successfully? Not choking? Showing appropriate gratitude for the provision of food that required actual effort to acquire? You manage to consume your portion without major incident, which seems to satisfy whatever criteria she was applying. The taste grows on you as you eat, or maybe your taste buds are just accepting their fate. Either way, by the time you've finished, you understand why your mother spends so much time and energy chasing things that don't want to be caught. This is significantly better than grass, even if grass doesn't require you to catch it first. The hunting lessons begin in earnest the next day, though lessons might be too generous a term for what amounts to you following your mother around while she occasionally pauses to correct your most egregious mistakes. You learn that successful hunting requires silence, patience, speed, accuracy, timing, and luck, all applied in the correct proportions at exactly the right moment. You possess none of these qualities in useful quantities, but enthusiasm has to count for something. Your first solo attempt at stalking involves a ground squirrel that seems to be either deaf or suicidal, given its apparent indifference to your approach. You manage to get within 3 feet of it before your coordination betrays you, and you trip over your own front paws, creating a noise like someone dropping a bag of small rocks. The squirrel looks at you with what might be pity before disappearing into a hole that definitely wasn't there a moment before. Mother's response to this debacle is the cheetah equivalent of a shrug. She's clearly operating under the assumption that competence will eventually emerge from repeated failure, like water eventually wearing down stone. You're not entirely convinced this theory applies to you, but you're willing to test it extensively, mostly because you don't have any better ideas. Your siblings are progressing through their own learning curves, each at their own pace and with their own signature style of failure. Show-off has managed to successfully stalk and capture a beetle, which they consumed with the pride of someone who just landed their first job. The smaller sibling has developed a technique that involves lying very still and hoping prey animals will walk close enough to grab, which works approximately never but requires minimal energy expenditure. The competition between you drives a kind of arms race of incompetence, each of you trying to fail slightly less spectacularly than the others. It's motivation of a sort, though not the kind that would inspire particularly rousing sports movies. Still, there's something to be said for sibling rivalry as a learning tool, even when the thing you're learning is how many different ways there are to miss a stationary target. As the weeks pass, you begin to develop what might charitably be called your own hunting style, though style implies intention rather than the happy accidents that occasionally result in success. Your approach tends to favor persistence over skill, stubbornness over strategy, and hoping for the best over planning for success. It's not elegant, but it's distinctly yours. The grass begins to feel less like an obstacle course and more like home. You know which patches are good for hiding, the tall ones near the termite mound, which areas your mother prefers for hunting, anywhere with decent sight lines and multiple escape routes, and where the water sources are located. Follow the game trails and hope for the best. These small pieces of knowledge accumulate like savings in a bank account you didn't know you were opening. Your relationship with the wider world starts to make sense in fragments. The other animals in your territory aren't just randomly distributed scenery, they're neighbors with their own schedules, preferences, and survival strategies. The zebras travel in predictable patterns, the wildebeest follow routes as reliable as city bus lines, and the gazelles, well, the gazelles remain frustratingly quick and annoyingly alert. By the end of your second month, you've achieved something approaching basic competence in the fundamental skills of being alive. Walking without falling down most of the time, eating without choking, and sleeping without falling off whatever you were sleeping on. These might seem like modest achievements, but in a world where small mistakes have large consequences, modest achievements are actually quite impressive. The social dynamics of cheetah adolescence are as complex and brutal as anything humans have devised for their own teenagers. Status is determined by hunting success, territorial control, and the indefinable quality of seeming to know what you're doing even when you don't. You rank somewhere near the bottom of this hierarchy, not because you're actively disliked, but because you inspire the kind of sympathetic concern usually reserved for people who are trying very hard but missing some crucial piece of information. Sleep becomes a refuge from the demands of being a functional predator, but even your dreams have begun to feature scenarios where you're chasing things that turn into other things or trying to catch prey animals that keep explaining why your technique is fundamentally flawed. You wake up more tired than when you went to sleep, as if even your subconscious has decided to get in on the act of making you feel inadequate. The seasonal rains arrive early that year, turning the savannah into a muddy obstacle course that makes hunting even more challenging than usual. The prey animals seem to adapt to the changed conditions with the casual efficiency of people adjusting their driving for weather, while you discover that wet grass is significantly more slippery than dry grass, and that mud has strong opinions about the direction you're supposed to be running. A particularly humiliating incident involves you slipping during what should have been a routine stalk, sliding down a gentle incline, and coming to rest in a shallow puddle directly in front of a family of warthogs who regard you with the kind of polite concern usually reserved for people who've just walked into a glass door. The warthog's reaction, a mixture of sympathy and second-hand embarrassment, somehow hurts more than open mockery would have. Your relationship with food becomes increasingly complicated as hunting failures mount and your mother's charity dwindles. You learn to appreciate scavenging opportunities with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new cuisine, though the social stigma of eating someone else's leftovers adds a layer of shame to meals that should be straightforward nutrition. The hyenas regard your scavenging attempts with professional amusement, like senior employees watching an intern try to figure out the coffee machine. By the end of your 8th month, you've achieved a state of functional incompetence that's almost impressive in its consistency. You're not good enough at hunting to be self-sufficient, not bad enough to inspire rescue attempts, and not improving fast enough to suggest that natural selection isn't paying attention. You exist in a liminal space between cub and adult, too old for the former and too inexperienced for the latter. The other young cheetahs have begun to pair off or form loose coalitions, social arrangements that seem to require a level of social sophistication you haven't developed yet. You watch these alliances form with the wistful interest of someone observing a party they weren't invited to, understanding that inclusion requires qualities you're not sure you possess and aren't certain you can develop. Your mother's final act of parenting is to stop returning to the den site altogether, leaving you to discover her absence the way you've discovered most important information in your life. Gradually, and with a growing sense that you should have seen this coming. The den feels enormous without her presence, like a house where all the furniture has been removed and you're not sure whether you're supposed to stay or go. Independence, when it finally arrives, doesn't feel like freedom so much as like being handed the keys to a car you don't know how to drive and being told to figure it out as you go. The world is suddenly full of decisions you're not qualified to make and responsibilities you're not prepared to handle, all while maintaining the pretense that you know what you're doing. You spend your first night completely alone, lying awake and listening to the sounds of the savannah, trying to distinguish between the normal background noise of a functioning ecosystem and the specific sounds that might indicate something is planning to make you its midnight snack. Every rustle of grass might be the wind, or it might be something with claws and opinions about your right to exist. The uncertainty is exhausting, but it's also oddly liberating if you're going to fail. At least now you'll fail on your own terms. You develop what might generously be called a hunting strategy, though strategic cowering would be more accurate. This philosophical approach to predation involves selecting the most incompetent-looking prey animals and then approaching them with all the stealth of a marching band having a disagreement about tempo. Your success rate hovers somewhere between pathetic and mathematically impossible, which would be discouraging if you hadn't already adjusted your expectations to accommodate a wide range of failure scenarios. The strategy emerges from necessity rather than inspiration, born from the humbling realization that traditional hunting methods require skills you don't possess and may never develop. Instead of trying to be the fastest cheetah or the most cunning predator, you decide to specialize in being patient enough to outlast prey animals who are having worse days than you are. It's not the most dignified approach to survival, but dignity is a luxury you can't afford when you're still figuring out how to catch things that don't want to be caught. Your target selection process reveals a touching optimism about the general competence level of Serengeti wildlife. You consistently choose prey animals that appear to be suffering from their own coordination issues, operating under the theory that incompetence recognizes incompetence and perhaps they'll be sympathetic to your plight. A limping Thompson's gazelle seems like a reasonable target until you discover that it's only limping because it stepped on a thorn, and removing the thorn restores it to full gazelle efficiency while you're still trying to figure out which direction it went. The approach phase of your hunts has evolved into an elaborate meditation on the nature of patience. You've learned to move so slowly that your stalking sessions sometimes outlast the attention spans of your intended victims, who wander away not because they've detected you, but because they've gotten bored with whatever they were doing when you first spotted them. This technique has the advantage of being very quiet and the disadvantage of being completely ineffective, but at least it's distinctly yours. Your camouflage skills are surprisingly good, partly because you've learned to stay so still for so long that you occasionally surprise yourself when you finally move. Birds have landed on you during extended stalking sessions, apparently mistaking you for an unusually spotted rock or a very committed piece of performance art. This level of stealth would be more useful if the next phase of hunting didn't require you to actually catch something, which involves movement and therefore exposes your complete lack of coordination. A particularly dim-witted ground squirrel becomes your white whale, or rather, your brown rodent. This creature appears to have been designed by the same committee that handled your proportions, resulting in an animal that moves with all the grace and strategic thinking of a small, furry pinball. It should, by all rights, be the perfect target for someone of your limited abilities, but the universe apparently has a sense of humor about these things. You spend 3 days stalking this squirrel with the dedication of an obsessed detective, investigating a particularly baffling cold case. Your approach is methodical, patient, and completely ineffective, like someone trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle by staring at the pieces very intensely and hoping they'll arrange themselves. The squirrel, meanwhile, goes about its business with the oblivious confidence of someone who has never considered the possibility that they might be anyone's lunch. The first day of what you privately call Operation Ground Squirrel involves approximately 6 hours of careful observation and strategic positioning. You learn that the squirrel has a territory roughly the size of a small parking lot, prefers seeds to insects, and has a tendency to sit in exposed locations while grooming itself with the focused attention of someone getting ready for a job interview. This behavior should make it an easy target, but easy is apparently a relative concept when you're dealing with your level of hunting incompetence. Your initial approach goes well for the first 15 minutes, during which you manage to close the gap between you and the squirrel from completely hopeless to theoretically possible. The squirrel remains blissfully unaware of your presence, apparently operating under the assumption that nothing larger than itself could be interested in its activities. This confidence would be insulting if it weren't so completely justified by your track record. The critical moment arrives when you're approximately 6 feet from your target, close enough to attempt a pounce, far enough away to have multiple backup plans if the pounce goes poorly. The squirrel is facing away from you, grooming its tail with the kind of thorough attention that suggests it has nowhere important to be and all day to get there. This is your moment, the culmination of hours of patient stalking and strategic positioning. Instead, you tell them the truth. Hunting is harder than it looks. Gazelles are faster than they appear, and falling down at full speed generates fascinating bruise patterns. They listen with the rapt attention of people who know they'll be having similar experiences soon enough, filing away your failures as cautionary tales for their own upcoming attempts at competence. As you settle in for the night, you realize that today marked a transition of sorts. You're no longer a completely theoretical predator, you're now a predator with actual experience, even if that experience consists mainly of falling down and disappointing gazelles. It's not the kind of progress that would make for inspiring wildlife documentaries, but it's progress nonetheless. Tomorrow, you'll try again, because that's what predators do. You'll chase something else, probably miss it in new and creative ways, and gradually accumulate the kind of failures that eventually add up to competence. It's not a particularly glamorous approach to mastering the art of being a cheetah, but it's your approach, and that has to count for something. In the distance, a hyena laughs at some private joke, and the sound carries across the savannah like commentary on the day's events. You choose to interpret it as encouragement rather than mockery, because optimism, like coordination, is a skill you're still developing. And in a world where success is measured in survival, optimism might be the most practical skill of all. At 8 months old, you've achieved something remarkable in the grand tradition of awkward adolescence. You look like someone took a perfectly reasonable cheetah design and fed it through a photocopier that was running low on toner and possibly having mechanical difficulties. Your legs have grown faster than your common sense, creating a creature that appears to have been designed by a committee specifically, a committee that couldn't agree on proportions and may have been drinking during the final design review. You're a gangly collection of spots and attitude, like a leopard that got stretched on a medieval torture device operated by someone who wasn't entirely clear on the instructions. Your paws seem too large for your legs seem too long for your body, and your body seems to belong to someone else entirely. When you walk, which you can now do without falling down most of the time, you look like someone operating a complicated piece of machinery they've never seen before and aren't entirely sure they're qualified to use. The spots that will eventually make you look distinguished and predatory currently make you look like someone spilled paint on a giraffe and then tried to fix it with a smaller brush. They're scattered across your coat in patterns that suggest either divine humor or cosmic indifference, creating a visual effect that's less apex predator and more abstract art project that got out of hand. Your face has begun the slow transformation from adorable cub to functional adult, but it's currently stuck somewhere in the middle, a no man's land of features that don't quite fit together yet. Your ears seem too large for your head, your whiskers are still figuring out which direction they're supposed to point, and your eyes have developed the permanently bewildered expression of someone who just woke up in a foreign country and can't remember how they got there. Independence looms like a pop quiz you forgot to study for, complete with essay questions about survival skills you're not entirely sure you possess. The comfortable world of following your mother around while she handles all the difficult parts of being alive is rapidly dissolving, replaced by the terrifying prospect of having to make your own decisions about where to go, what to eat, and how to avoid becoming someone else's dinner. Your mother has begun the gradual process of pretending you don't exist, a parenting technique that would seem harsh if it weren't so devastatingly effective. Her interactions with you have shifted from active instruction to benign neglect, like a teacher who's decided you're ready for independent study whether you feel ready or not. She still acknowledges your presence when you're directly in front of her, but her attention has developed a quality of polite distraction, as if she's already mentally moved on to whatever project comes after successfully raising offspring. This emotional distancing manifests in subtle ways that somehow hurt more than outright abandonment would. She no longer automatically shares her kills with you, forcing you to either catch your own food or perfect the art of looking pathetic enough to inspire charity. Her grooming sessions have become perfunctory, the kind of maintenance cleaning you might give to something you're planning to get rid of soon. Most tellingly, she's stopped correcting your mistakes, apparently having decided that natural selection is a more efficient teacher than she is. Your siblings have already begun the process of becoming strangers who occasionally nod at you from across the savannah like former co-workers you run into at the grocery store. The bonds that seemed so important during your first few months together are dissolving with the casual inevitability of chalk drawings in the rain. Show-off has developed an air of superiority that suggests they've figured out something about being a cheetah that the rest of you missed, while your smaller sibling has embraced a philosophy of aggressive independence that involves avoiding eye contact and pretending they don't recognize you when other cheetahs are around. The competition between you has evolved from playful wrestling to something with sharper edges, a rehearsal for the territorial disputes that will define your adult relationships. Every successful hunt, every impressive display of speed or stealth, every moment of competence becomes a point scored in a game where the rules keep changing, and the prize is the right to consider yourself adequate. Your first solo hunting attempts unfold with the predictable disaster of someone trying to perform surgery based on having watched medical dramas on television. The theoretical knowledge is there. You understand that hunting involves finding prey, approaching it quietly, chasing it down, and converting it from living animal to lunch. The practical application, however, requires a level of coordination between brain, body, and circumstances that you haven't achieved and aren't entirely sure is achievable. Your target selection process reveals a touching faith in your own abilities, combined with a complete inability to accurately assess those abilities. You consistently choose prey that's either too fast, too alert, too large, or too smart, apparently operating under the theory that confidence can substitute for competence. A young gazelle that's clearly in perfect health and possession of all its faculties seems like a reasonable target, because surely your natural predatory instincts will kick in at the crucial moment and transform you into the efficient killing machine your genetics insist you should be. The stalking phase of these hunts goes reasonably well, mostly because stalking is essentially advanced hiding, and you've always been good at staying in one place for extended periods. You can crouch motionless in tall grass for impressive lengths of time, becoming one with the landscape in a way that would be genuinely effective if the next phase didn't require you to actually move. The chase phase is where your hunting attempts typically transition from promising to educational. Your acceleration is adequate, not spectacular, but sufficient to close the gap between you and most prey animals. The problem arises when you need to do anything other than run in a straight line at a constant speed. Turning while running requires a level of body control that you're still developing. Stopping requires planning ahead in ways that don't come naturally, and catching something while running requires multitasking skills that make quantum physics seem straightforward by comparison. Most of your hunts end with you standing in empty grass, breathing heavily and wondering how something that seemed so close a moment ago managed to be somewhere else entirely. The prey animals in your territory have begun to regard your hunting attempts with the kind of professional interest usually reserved for educational demonstrations, occasionally pausing in their escapes to observe your technique with what you're increasingly certain is constructive criticism. The loneliness of growing up in a world designed for the competent settles over you like a familiar coat that doesn't quite fit anymore. Every day brings new evidence that the other young cheetahs your age are figuring out things that continue to baffle you, developing skills that seem to come naturally to everyone except you. They move through the world with a confidence that suggests they understand something fundamental about being a predator that you're still trying to learn from books written in a language you don't speak. Your mother's territory, which once felt like a vast playground full of interesting smells and potential adventures, has begun to feel smaller and more constraining. You find yourself ranging farther from the den site, not because you're ready for independence, but because the familiar places no longer offer the comfort they once did. Everything reminds you of your younger self, back when incompetence was charming rather than concerning, and failure was expected rather than embarrassing. The coalition consists of 3 other young cheetahs who have managed to achieve the kind of casual competence that makes survival look effortless. They move through their territory with the confident ease of people who understand the rules of the game and have developed strategies for winning, while you trail behind them like someone who showed up to the wrong party but is too polite to leave. Their leader, if leadership is the right term for someone who simply makes fewer mistakes than everyone else, is a particularly confident male who has somehow acquired the name Dash. The fact that he's named Dash, and not something more modest like adequately fast or reasonably coordinated, suggests either supreme confidence or the kind of self-awareness that borders on delusion. Given his actual hunting success rate, the confidence appears to be justified, which makes it even more irritating. Dash hunts with the kind of natural ability that makes success look boring, a casual demonstration of competence that somehow manages to be both impressive and insulting simultaneously. He approaches prey animals with the relaxed confidence of someone ordering from a familiar menu, selects his targets with the discriminating taste of a connoisseur, and executes his hunts with the efficient brutality of someone who's never seriously considered the possibility of failure. Watching Dash hunt is like watching someone perform a skill that should be difficult but appears effortless in the hands of someone who actually knows what they're doing. His movements flow from stalking to chasing to killing with a seamless efficiency that makes the whole process look choreographed, like a dance routine performed by someone who's practiced it so many times that they can execute it without thinking. Your own hunting attempts, by contrast, resemble elaborate physical comedy routines, performed by someone who's never seen comedy before and isn't entirely sure what the audience is supposed to be laughing at. Where Dash demonstrates smooth competence, you provide pratfalls and confused expressions. Where he shows natural predatory instincts, you offer creative interpretations of what hunting might look like if it were performed by someone with only a theoretical understanding of the concept. The contrast between your hunting styles becomes apparent during a group expedition that you've somehow been allowed to join, possibly out of curiosity about what you'll do next, or possibly because the others find your failures entertaining. The target is a small herd of Thompson's gazelles grazing in an area that provides excellent cover for approaching predators and multiple escape routes for prey animals, a setup that should be ideal for demonstrating hunting competence. Dash positions himself with the strategic thinking of someone playing 3-dimensional chess, calculating angles and distances with the casual precision of someone who's done this calculation so many times it's become automatic. The other coalition members take up supporting positions that will allow them to cut off escape routes and provide backup if the primary attack fails. It's a textbook example of coordinated hunting, the kind of tactical cooperation that makes cheetah coalitions more effective than individual hunters. Your role in this coordinated effort is somewhat less clear, partly because no one has explicitly assigned you a role, and partly because you're not sure what role you'd be qualified to perform. You position yourself in what seems like a reasonable location, though reasonable is a relative term when you're not entirely sure what the plan is or how you're supposed to contribute to its success. The hunt unfolds with the precise choreography of a military operation, each hunter moving into position at exactly the right moment and executing their part of the plan with efficient professionalism. The gazelles, sensing danger but not yet certain of its exact nature, begin the nervous shifting and head lifting that precedes either flight or the decision to resume grazing based on a more thorough threat assessment. Dash initiates the attack with a burst of speed that transforms him from stationary predator to blur of motion in the time it takes you to realize the hunt has begun. His target selection is perfect, a young gazelle that's positioned slightly away from the main herd and doesn't have optimal escape routes. His approach angle cuts off the most direct path to safety while herding the gazelle toward the positions occupied by the other coalition members. The gazelle's escape attempt is textbook prey behavior, immediate acceleration toward the perceived safety of the herd, combined with the zigzag running pattern that makes it difficult for predators to predict its exact location at any given moment. Under normal circumstances, this strategy would give it a reasonable chance of survival, but these aren't normal circumstances because it's being hunted by someone who actually knows what he's doing. Your contribution to this carefully orchestrated hunt consists mainly of running in approximately the right direction while trying not to interfere with the professionals. This approach has the advantage of keeping you involved in the action and the disadvantage of making it clear that your involvement is primarily decorative. You're like the fifth wheel on a sports car, technically part of the vehicle, but not contributing to its performance and possibly making it less efficient. The hunt concludes with Dash making a clean kill that demonstrates the kind of competence you aspire to but have never achieved. The gazelle's death is quick and professional, the result of skills honed through practice and natural ability working in harmony. The other coalition members converge on the kill site with the satisfied efficiency of people who've just completed a successful group project, while you arrive slightly out of breath and not entirely sure what your contribution was. The division of the meat follows protocols you're still learning, with portions allocated based on contribution to the hunt and social standing within the group. Your share is generous enough to be polite, but small enough to make it clear that you're being tolerated rather than truly accepted. You eat your portion with the mixed emotions of someone who's grateful for the food but embarrassed about how little they did to earn it. The post-hunt socializing reveals the complex dynamics of young cheetah society, a social structure based on demonstrated competence and the ability to contribute meaningfully to group survival. Your position in this hierarchy is roughly equivalent to that of a moderately useful mascot welcomed for entertainment value but not relied upon for anything important. The conversation, insofar as cheetahs have conversations, centers around technique, critique, and strategy refinement, the kind of professional discussion that athletes have after successful performances. Dash explains his target selection process with the casual authority of someone who's never had to question whether his instincts are reliable, while the others offer observations about timing and positioning that demonstrate their understanding of hunting as both art and science. Your attempts to contribute to this discussion are met with polite attention that barely conceals bewilderment about what you think you know about hunting strategy. When you mention your own recent hunting attempts, the response is the kind of diplomatic silence usually reserved for someone who's just told a joke that wasn't funny, leaving everyone unsure whether laughing would be rude or whether not laughing would be worse. The social dynamics become clearer over the following weeks as you continue to orbit the coalition without quite becoming part of it. Your relationship with the group resembles that of an exchange student who speaks the language adequately but misses most of the cultural subtleties, resulting in interactions that are technically successful but somehow off-key. Dash's attitude toward you evolves from initial curiosity to professional tolerance, the way a skilled craftsman might regard an apprentice who shows enthusiasm but lacks basic aptitude. He doesn't actively discourage your presence, but he doesn't modify his hunting strategies to accommodate your limitations either, leaving you to figure out how to be useful in situations where usefulness requires skills you don't possess. The other coalition members treat you with varying degrees of patience and amusement, their reactions ranging from helpful instruction to barely concealed exasperation. They seem to understand that you're trying to learn, but they're not sure whether what you're trying to learn is teachable or whether you possess the basic qualifications necessary for instruction. Your hunting demonstrations during group expeditions become a source of entertainment that the others apparently find endearing in small doses. They watch your attempts with the fascinated attention of people observing someone try to perform a skill they've only read about in books, knowing that the performance is likely to be educational in ways the performer didn't intend. The realization that charisma doesn't compensate for incompetence comes gradually, like the slow recognition that a joke you thought was funny is actually just confusing. Your enthusiasm for hunting and genuine desire to contribute to the group's success are appreciated, but appreciation doesn't translate into effectiveness when effectiveness requires specific skills that you lack. You launch yourself toward the squirrel with all the speed and accuracy you can muster, which turns out to be significantly less than the situation requires. Your trajectory is approximately correct, your timing is reasonable, and your landing is catastrophic. Instead of gracefully pouncing on your target, you execute what can only be described as a controlled crash, hitting the ground roughly where the squirrel was a moment before, with enough force to create a small crater and disturb the peace of everything within a 50-yard radius. The squirrel, meanwhile, has escaped by the simple expedient of running in a straight line while you zigged when you should have zagged. It pauses at a safe distance to observe your performance with what you're convinced is professional curiosity, like a dance instructor watching someone attempt a routine they've never practiced. The look it gives you suggests it's evaluating your technique and finding it wanting, which adds insult to the injury of having missed something that was practically standing still. Day 2 of Operation Ground Squirrel begins with renewed determination and a revised strategy that takes into account the lessons learned from Day 1's spectacular failure. You decide that the problem wasn't your approach or your timing, but your pouncing technique, which clearly needs work. This analysis would be more useful if you had any idea how to improve your pouncing technique, but optimism is an important part of any hunting strategy, even a fundamentally flawed one. The squirrel has either forgotten about yesterday's excitement or decided that you don't pose a serious enough threat to warrant changing its routine. It returns to the same general area, engages in the same grooming behaviors, and generally acts like someone who has never been the target of a predatory attack, no matter how incompetent. This consistency should work in your favor, but consistency requires you to be better than you were yesterday, and improvement is apparently not your strong suit. Your second attempt incorporates what you believe are important tactical modifications based on the previous day's experience. You approach from a different angle, allow for more distance between yourself and the target, and spend additional time calculating the trajectory of your pounce. These adjustments demonstrate a level of strategic thinking that would be impressive if strategy could compensate for fundamental coordination problems. The pounce itself is marginally better than your first attempt, in the sense that you land closer to where the squirrel was when you started jumping. However, closer is a relative term when you're still missing your target by distances that can be measured in feet rather than inches. The squirrel escapes using the same technique as before, running in a straight line while you attempt to change direction in mid-air, a maneuver that physics doesn't support and common sense actively discourages. By day 3, Operation Ground Squirrel has evolved from a hunting expedition into a philosophical exercise about the nature of persistence in the face of overwhelming evidence that you're not suited for this kind of work. The squirrel has begun to regard your appearances with what might be anticipation, as if your hunting attempts have become a source of entertainment that breaks up the monotony of seed gathering and territory maintenance. You've learned to rationalize failure as character building, a mental technique that allows you to frame repeated disappointment as a kind of educational program designed to teach you important lessons about humility and the value of low expectations. This rationalization doesn't make you any better at hunting, but it does make the failures easier to live with, which might be the most practical skill you've developed so far. The final attempt at catching your nemesis incorporates everything you've learned about the squirrel's behavior, your own limitations, and the fundamental laws of physics that govern the interaction between predators and prey. You approach with the patience of someone who has nowhere else to be and nothing else to do. Position yourself with the careful attention to detail of someone planning a bank heist, and execute your pounce with all the grace and accuracy you can muster. You miss by approximately the same margin as your previous attempts, but this time the squirrel doesn't immediately run away. Instead, it sits up on its hind legs and looks at you with an expression that seems to combine pity with professional curiosity, like a teacher trying to figure out how to help a student who clearly wants to learn but lacks the basic skills necessary for comprehension. For a moment, predator and prey regard each other across a gap measured not just in physical distance, but in fundamental competence. Then the squirrel turns and walks away, not runs, walks with the casual confidence of someone who has just realized they've been worried about a threat that doesn't actually exist. This final insult to your predatory pride somehow hurts less than it should, possibly because you've developed a philosophical acceptance of your own limitations, or possibly because you've run out of emotional energy to invest in feeling bad about things you can't control. The failure of Operation Ground Squirrel teaches you several important lessons about hunting, life, and the gap between ambition and ability. You learn that persistence doesn't always overcome incompetence, that some prey animals are too smart to be caught by someone of your skill level, and that there's a fine line between determination and delusion that you've been crossing regularly without noticing. You also discover that being built for speed doesn't automatically make you good at anything that requires speed plus other skills, like accuracy, timing, or the ability to think while moving quickly. This revelation is simultaneously liberating and liberating because it explains why you've been struggling with things that should be instinctive. Depressing because it suggests that your problems are fundamental rather than fixable through practice. The cruel irony of your situation becomes increasingly apparent as you spend more time observing other cheetahs and comparing their effortless competence to your laborious incompetence. You possess all the physical attributes of a successful predator: speed, agility, sharp claws, keen eyesight, but lack the coordination and timing necessary to use these attributes effectively. It's like being given all the ingredients for a perfect meal but no recipe and no cooking skills, then being expected to create something edible. Your hunting philosophy evolves to accommodate these realities, shifting from catch fast-moving prey through superior speed and skill to wait for slow-moving prey to make mistakes and hope for the best. This approach lacks the dramatic flair of traditional cheetah hunting, but it's more realistic given your actual abilities and the constraints of physics, biology, and your own persistent coordination problems. The other young cheetahs in the area have begun to notice your unique approach to predation, though their attention feels more like scientific curiosity than professional respect. They observe your hunting attempts with the fascinated horror of people watching someone try to parallel park a large vehicle in a space that's clearly too small, knowing it's going to end badly but unable to look away. Your reputation in the local cheetah community settles into a comfortable niche somewhere between harmless eccentric and cautionary tale. Other predators treat you with the kind of polite tolerance usually reserved for elderly relatives who tell the same stories repeatedly. Not exactly welcomed, but not actively avoided either. This social position is more comfortable than outright rejection, even if it's not particularly flattering. The ground squirrel, meanwhile, has apparently decided that you're a permanent fixture in its territory rather than a genuine threat. It goes about its business with the casual indifference of someone who has sized up a potential problem and decided it's not worth worrying about. This assessment is accurate but still somehow insulting, like being dismissed by someone whose opinion shouldn't matter but does. The other young cheetahs in the area regard you with the kind of casual disdain usually reserved for distant relatives at family reunions, not openly hostile, but clearly wishing you would make less noise and require less attention. Their attitude toward you has crystallized into something resembling professional pity, the way experienced workers might look at an intern who keeps asking questions that demonstrate fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of the job. You attempt to join their loose coalition with the optimism of someone applying for a position they're spectacularly unqualified for, but hoping enthusiasm will compensate for incompetence. This social experiment goes about as well as you'd expect from someone whose hunting resume includes once caught a butterfly by accident and successfully avoided being eaten by anything larger than a house cat. The butterfly incident, which you've mentally elevated to the status of legitimate hunting success, involved more luck than skill and occurred during a moment when you were actually trying to catch something else entirely. The coalition consists of 3 other young cheetahs who have managed to achieve the kind of casual competence that makes survival look effortless. They move through their territory with the confident ease of people who understand the rules of the game and have developed strategies for winning, while you trail behind them like someone who showed up to the wrong party but is too polite to leave. Their leader, if leadership is the right term for someone who simply makes fewer mistakes than everyone else, is a particularly confident male who has somehow acquired the name Dash. The fact that he's named Dash, and not something more modest like adequately fast or reasonably coordinated, suggests either supreme confidence or the kind of self-awareness that borders on delusion. Given his actual hunting success rate, the confidence appears to be justified, which makes it even more irritating. Dash hunts with the kind of natural ability that makes success look boring, a casual demonstration of competence that somehow manages to be both impressive and insulting simultaneously. He approaches prey animals with the relaxed confidence of someone ordering from a familiar menu, selects his targets with the discriminating taste of a connoisseur, and executes his hunts with the efficient brutality of someone who's never seriously considered the possibility of failure. Watching Dash hunt is like watching someone perform a skill that should be difficult but appears effortless in the hands of someone who actually knows what they're doing. His movements flow from stalking to chasing to killing with a seamless efficiency that makes the whole process look choreographed. like a dance routine performed by someone who's practiced it so many times that they can execute it without thinking. Your own hunting attempts, by contrast, resemble elaborate physical comedy routines performed by someone who's never seen comedy before and isn't entirely sure what the audience is supposed to be laughing at. Where Dash demonstrates smooth competence, you provide pratfalls and confused expressions. Where he shows natural predatory instincts, you offer creative interpretations of what hunting might look like if it were performed by someone with only a theoretical understanding of the concept. The contrast between your hunting styles becomes apparent during a group expedition that you've somehow been allowed to join, possibly out of curiosity about what you'll do next, or possibly because the others find your failures entertaining. The target is a small herd of Thompson's gazelles grazing in an area that provides excellent cover for approaching predators and multiple escape routes for prey animals, a setup that should be ideal for demonstrating hunting competence. Dash positions himself with the strategic thinking of someone playing three-dimensional chess, calculating angles and distances with the casual precision of someone who's done this calculation so many times it's become automatic. The other coalition members take up supporting positions that will allow them to cut off escape routes and provide backup if the primary attack fails. It's a textbook example of coordinated hunting, the kind of tactical cooperation that makes cheetah coalitions more effective than individual hunters. Your role in this coordinated effort is somewhat less clear, partly because no one has explicitly assigned you a role, and partly because you're not sure what role you'd be qualified to perform. You position yourself in what seems like a reasonable location, though reasonable is a relative term when you're not entirely sure what the plan is or how you're supposed to contribute to its success. The hunt unfolds with the precise choreography of a military operation, each hunter moving into position at exactly the right moment and executing their part of the plan with efficient professionalism. The gazelles, sensing danger but not yet certain of its exact nature, begin the nervous shifting and head lifting that precedes either flight or the decision to resume grazing based on a more thorough threat assessment. Dash initiates the attack with a burst of speed that transforms him from stationary predator to blur of motion in the time it takes you to realize the hunt has begun. His target selection is perfect, a young gazelle that's positioned slightly away from the main herd and doesn't have optimal escape routes. His approach angle cuts off the most direct path to safety while herding the gazelle toward the positions occupied by the other coalition members. The gazelle's escape attempt is textbook prey behavior, immediate acceleration toward the perceived safety of the herd, combined with the zigzag running pattern that makes it difficult for predators to predict its exact location at any given moment. Under normal circumstances, this strategy would give it a reasonable chance of survival, but these aren't normal circumstances because it's being hunted by someone who actually knows what he's doing. Your contribution to this carefully orchestrated hunt consists mainly of running in approximately the right direction while trying not to interfere with the professionals. This approach has the advantage of keeping you involved in the action and the disadvantage of making it clear that your involvement is primarily decorative. You're like the fifth wheel on a sports car, technically part of the vehicle, but not contributing to its performance and possibly making it less efficient. The hunt concludes with Dash making a clean kill that demonstrates the kind of competence you aspire to but have never achieved. The gazelle's death is quick and professional, the result of skills honed through practice and natural ability working in harmony. The other coalition members converge on the kill site with the satisfied efficiency of people who've just completed a successful group project, while you arrive slightly out of breath and not entirely sure what your contribution was. The division of the meat follows protocols you're still learning, with portions allocated based on contribution to the hunt and social standing within the group. Your share is generous enough to be polite, but small enough to make it clear that you're being tolerated rather than truly accepted. You eat your portion with the mixed emotions of someone who's grateful for the food but embarrassed about how little they did to earn it. The post-hunt socializing reveals the complex dynamics of young cheetah society, a social structure based on demonstrated competence and the ability to contribute meaningfully to group survival. Your position in this hierarchy is roughly equivalent to that of a moderately useful mascot welcomed for entertainment value but not relied upon for anything important. The conversation, insofar as cheetahs have conversations, centers around technique, critique, and strategy refinement, the kind of professional discussion that athletes have after successful performances. Dash explains his target selection process with the casual authority of someone who's never had to question whether his instincts are reliable, while the others offer observations about timing and positioning that demonstrate their understanding of hunting as both art and science. Your attempts to contribute to this discussion are met with polite attention that barely conceals bewilderment about what you think you know about hunting strategy. When you mention your own recent hunting attempts, the response is the kind of diplomatic silence usually reserved for someone who's just told a joke that wasn't funny, leaving everyone unsure whether laughing would be rude or whether not laughing would be worse. The social dynamics become clearer over the following weeks as you continue to orbit the coalition without quite becoming part of it. Your relationship with the group resembles that of an exchange student who speaks the language adequately but misses most of the cultural subtleties, resulting in interactions that are technically successful but somehow off-key. Dash's attitude toward you evolves from initial curiosity to professional tolerance, the way a skilled craftsman might regard an apprentice who shows enthusiasm but lacks basic aptitude. He doesn't actively discourage your presence, but he doesn't modify his hunting strategies to accommodate your limitations either, leaving you to figure out how to be useful in situations where usefulness requires skills you don't possess. The other coalition members treat you with varying degrees of patience and amusement, their reactions ranging from helpful instruction to barely concealed exasperation. They seem to understand that you're trying to learn, but they're not sure whether what you're trying to learn is teachable or whether you possess the basic qualifications necessary for instruction. Your hunting demonstrations during group expeditions become a source of entertainment that the others apparently find endearing in small doses. They watch your attempts with the fascinated attention of people observing someone try to perform a skill they've only read about in books, knowing that the performance is likely to be educational in ways the performer didn't intend. The realization that charisma doesn't compensate for incompetence comes gradually, like the slow recognition that a joke you thought was funny is actually just confusing. Your enthusiasm for hunting and genuine desire to contribute to the group's success are appreciated, but appreciation doesn't translate into effectiveness when effectiveness requires specific skills that you lack. The social hierarchy of young predators proves to be as brutal and clearly defined as any human organization, with status determined by measurable contributions to group survival rather than good intentions or personal likability. Your position near the bottom of this hierarchy isn't the result of active discrimination, but the natural consequence of being bad at the things that matter most in your particular society. Learning to accept this position without resentment becomes one of your more important developmental challenges, like learning to be comfortable with being the worst player on a team that's still willing to let you practice with them. The alternative, leaving the group entirely, would be worse than accepting a subordinate role, so you gradually adjust your expectations to match your actual abilities and social value. The territory you share with the coalition expands and contracts based on seasonal prey movements and the presence of competing predator groups, giving you opportunities to observe how territorial disputes are resolved when competent cheetahs are involved. These negotiations involve a complex mixture of posturing, demonstration, and actual combat that requires exactly the kind of confidence and skill you lack. Your role during these territorial encounters is primarily to look numerous, adding to the coalition's apparent strength through your physical presence while being careful not to do anything that might actually affect the outcome. This supporting role suits your abilities perfectly, allowing you to contribute to group success without being required to demonstrate individual competence. Your first successful hunt happens entirely by accident, which somehow makes it both more impressive and less impressive simultaneously, a paradox that captures the essential absurdity of your relationship with competence. The circumstances surrounding this triumph are so specific and unlikely that reproducing them would require the kind of cosmic alignment usually associated with solar eclipses or finding a parking space during the busy season. The setup is deceptively ordinary. A young Thompson's gazelle grazing alone near a cluster of fever trees, apparently suffering from the same kind of situational awareness deficit that has characterized your own navigation through the world. This gazelle appears to have been designed by the same cosmic committee responsible for your proportions, resulting in a creature that moves with all the grace and strategic thinking of someone trying to walk in shoes that don't fit while carrying something fragile. You've been observing this particular gazelle for the better part of an hour, not because you've identified it as a promising target, but because watching it graze is oddly soothing, like meditation with spots. The gazelle has a tendency to wander in circles, occasionally stopping to examine things that don't appear to be there, and periodically looking up with the startled expression of someone who's just remembered they forgot to do something important but can't recall what it was. The decision to attempt a hunt isn't really a decision so much as a gradual escalation of curiosity about whether you could actually catch something that seems to be operating under the same fundamental misunderstandings about physics and coordination that have defined your own existence. It's less predatory ambition and more scientific inquiry into the possibility of incompetence successfully interacting with itself. Your approach follows the standard stalking protocol you've been practicing for months, which involves moving very slowly while trying to look like a rock or a small, non-threatening shrub. This technique has never actually resulted in catching anything, but it has the advantage of being quiet and giving you time to think about what you'll do if you actually get close enough to your target to attempt a pounce. The gazelle continues its aimless grazing pattern, occasionally glancing up to scan for threats with the kind of perfunctory attention usually reserved for checking the weather when you're not planning to go outside anyway. Its threat assessment process appears to be roughly as reliable as your hunting technique, which should theoretically work in your favor if the universe has any sense of poetic justice. You manage to close the distance to approximately 20 feet before the gazelle notices your presence, and even then its reaction suggests confusion rather than alarm. It looks at you with the expression of someone trying to remember whether they've met you before and whether they're supposed to know your name. This momentary hesitation gives you time to consider your options, which are limited but theoretically include actually attempting to catch the thing you've been stalking. The charge that follows can only be described as enthusiastic incompetence meeting bewildered resignation. You launch yourself toward the gazelle with all the speed and coordination you can muster, which under normal circumstances would result in you missing your target by a margin that could be measured in postal codes. The gazelle, meanwhile, attempts to flee with the kind of panic that suggests it's just remembered what cheetahs are supposed to do to gazelles. What happens next defies both probability and your personal track record of hunting failures. The gazelle, in its haste to escape someone who has never successfully caught anything larger than an insect, runs directly into one of the fever trees with a sound like someone dropping a small piano from a moderate height. This collision appears to surprise the gazelle more than it surprises you, though you're also fairly shocked by this unexpected development. The gazelle staggers backward from the tree with the bewildered expression of someone who's just walked into a glass door they didn't see, pauses for a moment as if considering its options, and then collapses with the resigned finality of someone who's decided that today is just not their day. You stand approximately 10 feet away, having skidded to a stop when your target disappeared from your intended trajectory, staring at what appears to be your first successful hunt. The silence that follows this incident is profound, broken only by the sound of your own breathing and the distant noise of other animals going about their business with the casual indifference of people who haven't just witnessed someone succeed through complete accident. You approach the gazelle cautiously, not entirely convinced that it's actually dead, and half expecting it to jump up and explain that this was all part of some elaborate practical joke. The gazelle is, indeed, dead, apparently having suffered the kind of traumatic head injury that results from running full speed into immovable objects while not paying attention to where you're going. This death seems both tragic and faintly ridiculous, like something that would happen to a cartoon character if cartoon characters actually died from their mishaps instead of just seeing stars and shaking their heads. You stand over your kill with the bewildered pride of someone who just won a lottery they didn't know they'd entered, trying to process the fact that you've actually succeeded at hunting something, even if the success required no skill on your part and was entirely dependent on your target's apparent death wish. The gazelle looks peaceful in death, like someone who's finally gotten some rest after a particularly exhausting day. The other cheetahs witness this triumph of incompetence over competence, with expressions that range from amazement to second-hand embarrassment. Dash arrives first, drawn by the unusual sight of you standing over an actual dead animal instead of staring at empty grass while wondering where your target went. His examination of the scene includes a careful inspection of the gazelle, the tree, and you, as if he's trying to determine whether you've finally developed hunting skills or whether this is just another example of the universe's sense of humor. The story of what happened spreads through the local cheetah community, with the speed usually reserved for particularly scandalous gossip. Within hours, you've achieved a reputation as either the luckiest hunter in the Serengeti or the most accidentally effective predator in recent memory. Neither interpretation is particularly flattering, but both are more interesting than your previous reputation as the cheetah most likely to miss stationary targets. The other coalition members treat you with a new kind of respect that seems to combine genuine admiration with professional bewilderment. They understand that you've successfully killed prey, which is the fundamental measure of predatory success. But they're not entirely sure how to categorize a kill that required no hunting skill and was entirely dependent on the victim's coordination being even worse than yours. Your own confusion about whether you're actually good at hunting becomes the central philosophical question of your immediate existence. On one hand, you've demonstrably succeeded at the primary task that defines cheetah life, which suggests a level of competence you've never displayed before. On the other hand, your success was entirely accidental and probably unrepeatable, which suggests that you're still the same incompetent predator you were before, just with better luck. The philosophical implications of succeeding through failure occupy your thoughts while you eat your accidentally acquired meal. The meat tastes exactly the same as it would if you'd caught the gazelle through skill and planning, but the satisfaction is complicated by the knowledge that you had nothing to do with the hunting success beyond being present when your target decided to commit involuntary suicide by tree. Even the scavengers seem embarrassed for you, picking at the carcass with apologetic efficiency, like guests at a dinner party who've been served food they didn't realize was stolen. The hyenas, normally enthusiastic about any opportunity to claim leftovers, approach your kill with the hesitant demeanor of people who aren't sure whether congratulations or condolences are more appropriate. The brief moment of confidence that follows your accidental success is both exhilarating and terrifying, like being handed the keys to a sports car when you've only ever driven a bicycle. For approximately 24 hours, you walk through your territory with the swagger of someone who has successfully hunted prey, even if the hunting part was performed by a tree and your role was more observational than participatory. This confidence evaporates the moment you attempt to replicate your success with a more traditional hunting approach. Your next several hunting attempts demonstrate conclusively that the Great Gazelle incident was a statistical anomaly rather than evidence of emerging competence. You return to your familiar pattern of missing targets by impressive distances and providing entertainment for prey animals who are beginning to recognize you as a regular feature of their landscape. The realization that one lucky accident doesn't transform you into a competent predator is simultaneously disappointing and relieving. Disappointing because you'd briefly entertained fantasies of joining the ranks of effective hunters. Relieving because maintaining that level of performance would require skills you don't possess and pressure you're not equipped to handle. Your relationship with the coalition shifts subtly in the aftermath of the Great Gazelle incident. You're no longer just the incompetent tag-along who provides comic relief. You're the incompetent tag-along who provides comic relief, but has also demonstrated that even incompetent predators can occasionally succeed under the right circumstances. This isn't exactly respect, but it's closer to respect than anything you've experienced before. Dash's attitude toward you evolves from professional tolerance to something approaching collegial bewilderment. He seems to understand that you've achieved a legitimate hunting success, but he's also clearly baffled by the mechanism of that success and uncertain whether it represents improvement or just extremely good luck. His interactions with you now include a note of caution, as if he's not sure whether you're developing competence or whether competence is developing around you through environmental factors. The story of your accidental hunt becomes part of local cheetah folklore, the kind of tale that gets told when someone needs an example of how unpredictable life can be in the Serengeti. You're not sure whether being featured in folklore is an honor or a cautionary tale, but it's definitely more interesting than being completely forgettable, which has been your primary achievement until now. The Great Gazelle incident teaches you several important lessons about success, failure, and the complicated relationship between effort and outcome. You learn that sometimes trying very hard is less effective than being in the right place when someone else makes a critical error. You discover that success tastes the same regardless of how you achieve it, but the satisfaction depends on whether you feel you've earned it. Most importantly, you realize that in a world where survival depends on catching things that don't want to be caught, any success is valuable regardless of how it's achieved. The ecosystem doesn't award style points for elegant hunting technique, it only cares whether you can convert prey animals into calories efficiently enough to stay alive. By that measure, your accidental hunt is as valuable as any demonstration of traditional hunting skill. the other prey animals in your territory begin to regard you with a new kind of wariness that has nothing to do with your actual abilities and everything to do with your recent success. They understand that you've killed one of their number, even if the mechanism of that killing was unconventional, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. This reputation as an actual threat is both flattering and pressure-inducing, since it creates expectations you're not equipped to meet. Your brief moment in the spotlight as a successful hunter ends not with dramatic failure, but with a gradual return to your familiar pattern of hunting attempts that result in confused prey animals and exercise rather than food. The Great Gazelle incident becomes a pleasant memory rather than a repeatable strategy, like a vacation to somewhere you enjoyed but can't afford to visit again. Reality reasserts itself with the gentle persistence of gravity, reminding you that one lucky accident doesn't change your fundamental relationship with competence. You're still the same cheetah who trips over his own paws and misses stationary targets, just with one impressive addition to your hunting resume and a story that gets more dramatic each time someone else tells it. The aftermath of your accidental success settles into a comfortable routine of slightly elevated expectations combined with unchanged abilities. The coalition continues to tolerate your presence with the same mixture of affection and professional concern they've always shown. But now there's an additional note of possibility in their interactions, as if they're not sure whether you might accidentally succeed again under the right circumstances. You return to your patient, methodical approach to hunting with the knowledge that even the most unlikely successes are possible if you're persistent enough and the universe is feeling particularly ironic. This isn't exactly confidence, but it's something closer to hope than despair, which represents a significant improvement in your overall approach to existence as a predator who happens to be terrible at predating. At 2 years old, you've achieved something remarkable in the grand scheme of cheetah accomplishments: consistent averageness. Your hunting success rate has improved from comically bad to disappointingly mediocre, which feels like progress, even though it's not particularly impressive by any objective standard. You catch enough to survive, which is technically all that evolution requires, but not enough to inspire awe or envy in other predators. You've found your niche, and it turns out your niche is being adequate. You've claimed a territory that other cheetahs describe as adequate when they're being polite, and serviceable when they think you can't hear them. It's the kind of assessment that damns with faint praise, like being told your cooking is edible or your appearance is presentable. The territory encompasses roughly 3 square kilometers of unremarkable grassland, dotted with a few fever trees that provide adequate shade and marked by boundaries that you've established through persistence rather than dominance. The claiming process involved less dramatic confrontation and more patient, waiting for the previous occupant to become bored with defending something he wasn't particularly attached to. Your strategy of being consistently present but not threateningly competent eventually wore down his resistance, like water wearing away stone through sheer persistence rather than force. When he finally wandered off to find more interesting challenges, you inherited your domain through default rather than conquest. Your daily routine settles into a pattern as predictable as sunrise. Wake up around dawn, survey your unremarkable domain while stretching muscles that protest the previous day's hunting attempts, hunt something with moderate success, roughly every 3rd day. Nap extensively in whatever shade is available, and repeat. It's the kind of life that would make for a very boring nature documentary, which suits you fine because excitement has historically ended poorly for you. The surveying portion of your day involves a leisurely patrol that serves multiple purposes, marking territory boundaries, checking for intruders, assessing prey animal populations, and giving yourself something to do that feels purposeful. You've developed a mental map of your territory that includes optimal hunting locations, reliable water sources, good napping spots, and escape routes for emergencies. This knowledge accumulates slowly, like a savings account you contribute to without thinking about it. The comfort of low expectations becomes one of your greatest assets. When you catch something, it feels like a pleasant surprise rather than a foregone conclusion. When you miss, it's disappointing but not devastating. You've calibrated your emotional responses to match your actual abilities, creating a sustainable relationship with success and failure that doesn't require constant validation from external sources. Your philosophy evolves into something you privately call good enough, a worldview that emphasizes adequacy over excellence and consistency over brilliance. This isn't settling for less than you deserve, it's recognizing what you can realistically achieve and finding satisfaction in that achievement. It's the difference between being disappointed that you're not the fastest cheetah in the Serengeti and being pleased that you're fast enough to catch dinner most of the time. Mating season arrives like an unwelcome reminder that you're supposed to be impressive, carrying with it the expectation that you'll suddenly develop charm, confidence, and hunting prowess sufficient to attract a mate. The female cheetahs in the area have standards, unfortunately, and you don't meet most of them. Your romantic prospects are limited by the harsh reality that evolution favors the competent, and competence has never been your strong suit. The courtship rituals of cheetahs emphasize exactly the qualities you lack: speed, agility, hunting success, and the kind of confident dominance that comes from never having seriously doubted your own abilities. Your attempts at impressive displays showcase all the smooth sophistication of someone trying to parallel park while being watched by traffic police, technically adequate but lacking the effortless grace that makes the difference between functional and attractive. A female named Swift becomes the object of your hopeless affection, drawn by her combination of practical competence and apparent tolerance for mediocrity. She's not the most beautiful or successful female in the area, but she's the only one who doesn't immediately leave when you approach, which makes her perfect by your carefully adjusted standards. Swift tolerates your presence with the kind of patience usually reserved for persistent door-to-door salespeople, not enthusiastic, but not actively hostile either. Your courtship consists mainly of following her around at a respectful distance, while she occasionally looks back with expressions ranging from mild confusion to active pity. You attempt to demonstrate your hunting prowess through elaborate stalking displays that usually end with you catching nothing but her attention, which might count as success if attention were edible. Your romantic strategy emphasizes persistence over passion, hoping that being consistently present will eventually be interpreted as devotion rather than stalking. The loneliness of being persistently adequate becomes acute during mating season. You watch other males compete for female attention through impressive displays of speed and strength, while your own displays are more notable for their enthusiasm than their effectiveness. You're like someone trying to compete in a talent show where your talent is being exactly average at everything. Against all odds and basic biological probability, Swift decides you're acceptable enough for reproductive purposes. This decision seems to surprise her as much as it does you, like someone who accidentally ordered something expensive online and decided to keep it rather than deal with the return process. Her mate selection appears to be based on practical considerations rather than romantic attraction. You're available, persistent, and unlikely to abandon her for someone more impressive. 3 months later, you become a father to 2 cubs who regard you with the same bewildered disappointment you once directed at the world. They're perfect small copies of every cheetah who's ever looked at you with professional concern, complete with the instinctive awareness that they've been assigned a parent who may not be qualified for the position. Parenthood, it turns out, is less about being a good role model and more about preventing small, suicidal creatures from killing themselves through sheer enthusiasm. Your cubs possess all the coordination you lacked at their age, but none of the caution that might keep them alive long enough to develop wisdom. They attack everything with indiscriminate enthusiasm, including your ears, tail, and what remains of your dignity after years of hunting failures and social awkwardness. Teaching them to hunt involves mostly preventing them from hunting you, a task that requires constant vigilance and occasional undignified retreat. The responsibility of keeping beings alive who seem determined to die through creative misadventure proves both exhausting and oddly satisfying. For the first time in your life, your cautious approach to existence becomes an asset rather than a limitation. Where other parents might encourage bold exploration, you emphasize the virtues of careful observation and thinking before acting, skills that have kept you alive, despite your many inadequacies. Your cubs grow with the kind of reckless energy that makes you nostalgic for your own more cautious approach to existence. They demonstrate the universal truth that children are capable of making the same mistakes as their parents, but faster and with more confidence. Watching them stumble through their early attempts at basic life skills provides you with a new perspective on your own development, apparently. Incompetence is hereditary, but so is the capacity to eventually overcome it through persistent effort. Swift handles the actual education while you provide comic relief and occasional backup, like a teaching assistant who's not entirely sure what subject they're supposed to be helping with. Her practical approach to child rearing emphasizes survival skills over style points, a philosophy that suits your abilities perfectly. You contribute what you can, mainly cautionary tales and examples of what not to do while trying to stay out of the way of actual instruction. Your cubs seem to inherit your capacity for creative failure, which you choose to interpret as a gift rather than a genetic flaw. They miss targets with impressive consistency, trip over their own paws with artistic flair, and approach hunting with the kind of optimistic incompetence that reminds you of your own youth. The pride you feel watching them fail slightly better than you did at their age is both genuine and slightly pathetic, but it's your pride, and you've earned it through years of persistent mediocrity. Understanding your own parents' resigned patience becomes one of the unexpected gifts of parenthood. The look your mother used to give you, part exasperation, part affection, part bewildered concern, now makes perfect sense, as you watch your own offspring attempt to master skills that should be instinctive, but apparently require extensive practice and multiple failures before achieving basic competence. The cub's eventual success at catching small prey fills you with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for major accomplishments. When your daughter successfully hunts her first ground squirrel, you feel the pride of someone whose protege has just won a major award, even though ground squirrels are hardly challenging prey, and your contribution to her success was mainly not interfering with Swift's actual teaching. Your role as a father settles into a comfortable pattern of being useful without being essential, present without being intrusive, and proud without being delusional about your contributions. It's the same approach you've taken to most aspects of life, showing up consistently, doing what you can, and finding satisfaction in small successes rather than demanding dramatic achievements. Something unexpected happens around your 4th birthday. You become competent, not exceptional, not remarkable, just quietly, boringly good at being a cheetah. Your hunting success rate climbs to respectable levels through nothing more impressive than persistence and accumulated experience, like a mediocre student who finally graduates through perfect attendance rather than natural brilliance. The transformation happens so gradually that you don't notice it until other cheetahs begin treating you differently, with the kind of respectful indifference usually reserved for reliable but unexciting neighbors. The change manifests in small ways that collectively add up to something approaching adequacy. Your stalks no longer end with prey animals looking at you with pity before wandering away. Your chases occasionally result in actual captures rather than elaborate exercises in cardiovascular fitness. Your territory begins to feel less like somewhere you're camping temporarily and more like a place you actually belong. These improvements arrive without fanfare or dramatic revelation, accumulating like dust until one day you realize you're not embarrassingly bad at being a predator anymore. The other cheetahs in the area gradually revise their assessment of you from harmless incompetent to adequate neighbor, a social promotion that feels more significant than it probably should. You've become the cheetah equivalent of a Honda Civic. Not flashy, not exciting, but dependable enough that people stop thinking about you unless they need something reliable. This might be the highest compliment you've ever received, and you're surprised by how satisfying it feels to be taken for granted in a positive way. Your hunting style develops its own internal logic based on experience rather than instinct. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate when prey animals are having off days, when weather conditions favor patience over speed, and when retreat is more practical than persistence. This accumulated knowledge doesn't make you impressive, but it makes you effective in a quietly sustainable way that keeps your family fed without requiring heroic efforts or dramatic risks. The satisfaction of being boringly successful proves more durable than the brief highs of exceptional achievement. You no longer need to prove anything to yourself or others, you simply need to continue doing what you've learned to do reasonably well. This represents a kind of professional maturity that you never expected to achieve, the comfortable competence of someone who's found their appropriate level and made peace with it. Your territory expands not through conquest, but through other cheetahs, gradually losing interest in defending borders against someone so unthreatening. Your expansion strategy involves being present without being pushy, claiming space through consistent use rather than dramatic confrontation. It's like inheriting property from relatives who got tired of maintaining it. Not glamorous, but effective and legally yours. You've developed a hunting philosophy that emphasizes patience over speed, cunning over power, and accepting whatever the savannah offers rather than demanding what you want. This approach lacks the dramatic flair of traditional cheetah hunting, but it produces consistent results without requiring you to be better than you actually are. You hunt like S. You've developed a hunting philosophy that emphasizes patience over speed, cunning over power, and accepting whatever the savannah offers rather than demanding what you want. This approach lacks the dramatic flair of traditional cheetah hunting, but it produces consistent results without requiring you to be better than you actually are. You hunt like someone shopping at a discount store, not looking for specific items, but ready to take advantage of whatever good deals present themselves. Young cheetahs occasionally seek your advice, apparently mistaking your accumulated failures for wisdom. This development surprises you more than anyone, but you find yourself dispensing guidance that actually seems to help. Try not to run into things. Sometimes the gazelle trips by itself. And, if you miss, pretend you were aiming for something else. These insights sound trivial when you say them, but they represent hard-won understanding of how to work with your limitations rather than against them. Teaching others makes you realize you might actually know something after all. The knowledge you've gained through years of creative failure translates into practical advice for cheetahs who share your basic competence limitations. You become an unofficial mentor for the adequately gifted, helping them find sustainable approaches to survival that don't require being exceptional at anything in particular. The unexpected satisfaction of being useful provides a new dimension to your existence. For the first time in your life, other cheetahs seek you out for your expertise rather than your entertainment value. This role suits you perfectly. You're helpful without being essential, knowledgeable without being brilliant, and experienced without being intimidating. It's the kind of middle management position that makes good use of your particular combination of skills and limitations. A severe drought arrives like a cosmic stress test, reducing the savannah to a harsh mathematics of survival where only the essential matters. The landscape transforms from abundance to scarcity, from forgiving to brutal, from a place where mediocrity can flourish to an environment where every calorie counts and every mistake might be fatal. Suddenly, your mediocre hunting skills become valuable not because they're impressive, but because they're consistent and don't rely on conditions being perfect. While more talented cheetahs struggle with the pressure of maintaining their reputations during increasingly difficult hunts, you simply adjust your expectations downward and carry on. Your approach to hunting has always assumed that success would be difficult and failure would be common, so the drought doesn't require you to recalibrate your psychological expectations the way it does for cheetahs accustomed to easy victories. You discover that being unremarkable has prepared you well for hard times. Your hunting techniques work just as well when prey is scarce because they were designed for conditions where success was already unlikely. Your mental approach to failure serves you well when everyone is failing more often, and your conservative resource management prevents the kind of dramatic mistakes that turn temporary setbacks into permanent disasters. Your cubs, now grown and scattered across their own territories, occasionally return during the worst periods of the drought. These family reunions are driven by necessity rather than sentiment, but they demonstrate that your offspring have inherited your talent for surviving through stubborn persistence rather than brilliance. Swift nods approvingly at your family's capacity for enduring boring hardship without drama or complaint. The drought becomes a great equalizer, proving that survival skills matter more than hunting style when resources are limited. Your advantage lies not in being better than other cheetahs, but in having realistic expectations and sustainable practices that work under adverse conditions. When the rains finally return, you're among the survivors not because you were the strongest or fastest, but because you were adequately prepared for things to go badly. A new generation of cheetahs arrives in your territory with the kind of confidence that comes from never having failed at anything important. They regard you with polite dismissal, the way young professionals look at their parents' careers, technically respectable, but clearly from a less sophisticated era when people didn't understand modern methods. One particularly cocky male named Lightning decides to demonstrate superior hunting techniques in your territory, apparently viewing you as a convenient audience for his upcoming masterclass in predatory excellence. What follows is less a territorial dispute and more an educational seminar on the difference between talent and experience. Lightning is faster, stronger, and more agile than you've ever been, but he's also impatient, overconfident, and unprepared for prey animals who don't cooperate with his expectations. His hunting attempts are spectacular demonstrations of athletic ability that consistently fail to produce food, like watching someone perform elaborate diving routines into an empty pool. You respond to this challenge not with matching displays of speed and strength, but with your usual approach of patient observation and practical adaptation. While Lightning exhausts himself chasing gazelles that are clearly too alert and healthy to be caught, you wait for opportunities that match your abilities rather than your ambitions. Your quiet successes begin to accumulate, while his spectacular failures provide entertainment for the local wildlife. The contrast between your approaches becomes a teaching moment that neither of you planned. Lightning's superior physical abilities can't compensate for his lack of practical experience, while your limited natural gifts are enhanced by years of learning to work within your constraints. The younger generation's gradual, grudging respect for your methods feels more satisfying than any dramatic victory could have, because it represents recognition of competence rather than luck. Eventually, Lightning begins asking subtle questions about your hunting techniques, framed as casual curiosity rather than admission that he might need advice from someone he initially dismissed. You share what you've learned about patience, timing, and the art of taking what the savannah offers rather than demanding what you want. These conversations mark your transition from tolerated neighbor to respected elder, a role you never expected to achieve but find surprisingly comfortable. The young challengers ultimately become students rather than competitors, drawn by the practical value of your hard-won expertise. Your territory becomes a kind of informal academy, where talented but inexperienced cheetahs learn the difference between being impressive and being effective. This educational role provides meaning and purpose that pure survival never offered, making your middle age more interesting than your youth ever was. At 7 years old, you've achieved something remarkable in cheetah terms. You're still alive and relatively functional. This accomplishment might seem modest to species that routinely live for decades, but in the harsh mathematics of Serengeti survival, reaching 7 is like completing a marathon that most participants don't finish. Your joints creak like old furniture when you rise from your afternoon naps, producing sounds that suggest years of accumulated wear rather than any specific injury. Your reflexes have slowed from inadequate to merely adequate, which represents less of a decline than you might expect given your starting point. Your once golden coat has faded to the color of old honey, the spots becoming less distinct against fur that's developed, the kind of weathered patina that comes from years of sun, rain, and the general wear of existence. The sleek predator lines of your youth have softened into something more comfortable and less intimidating, like a sports car that's been converted for family use. You look exactly like what you are, a cheetah who's been adequately cheetahing for long enough that the effort shows. But you're still here, which counts for something significant in a world designed to eliminate the insufficiently impressive. Every morning that you wake up is a small victory over the natural forces that have been trying to edit you out of existence since birth. Your survival represents not triumph over adversity, but persistence through it, the biological equivalent of showing up to work every day for 7 years and never getting fired. The younger generation now treats you with the kind of respectful wariness usually reserved for elderly relatives who might have interesting stories or useful inheritance. They approach you with a mixture of curiosity and caution, not entirely sure whether you're wise or just old, but recognizing that the distinction might not matter as much as the accumulated experience either way. Your opinions carry weight not because they're particularly insightful, but because they come from someone who's survived long enough to have opinions about things. Your territory has evolved into something resembling a neighborhood institution, the kind of established presence that provides stability even when it's not particularly exciting. Other cheetahs know they can find you in roughly the same locations at roughly the same times, pursuing roughly the same activities with the kind of predictable consistency that makes life easier for everyone. You've become the cheetah equivalent of a reliable local business, not flashy, but dependable and somehow reassuring. This reliability has transformed your territory into a sort of informal embassy, where disputes get resolved through your boring but effective mediation rather than dramatic confrontation. Young cheetahs bring their territorial disagreements to you not because you're particularly wise, but because you're patient enough to listen to both sides and experienced enough to suggest solutions that don't require anyone to risk serious injury. Your mediation style emphasizes practical compromise over dramatic resolution, the diplomatic equivalent of suggesting that everyone involved should probably just calm down and think about whether this is really worth fighting over. The process of becoming an elder statesman happened so gradually that you barely noticed it, like developing a reputation for making good coffee, Suddenly people are asking your opinion about things you don't remember becoming an expert on. One day you're just another middle-aged cheetah trying to catch enough food to stay alive. And the next day, younger cheetahs are seeking your advice about hunting techniques, territorial boundaries, and the general challenge of being adequately predatory in a world that seems designed for the more competent. Your advisory role suits your temperament perfectly. You offer guidance based on extensive experience with failure rather than dramatic success, which proves surprisingly valuable to cheetahs who are struggling with their own limitations. Your advice tends toward the practical rather than the inspirational. Don't chase anything that looks like it's having a good day. Save energy for hunts that might actually work. And sometimes not catching anything is better than getting injured trying to catch something. The quiet satisfaction of being a survivor becomes one of the unexpected pleasures of your golden years. You've outlasted cheetahs who were faster, stronger, and more naturally gifted, not through superior ability, but through superior stubbornness and an apparently genetic inability to give up on existence. This longevity represents a kind of success that's different from, but no less real, than hunting prowess or territorial dominance. Accepting the role of elder requires a fundamental shift in how you think about your place in the world. Instead of trying to prove yourself worthy of respect, you've somehow earned respect simply by persisting long enough that your continued existence becomes noteworthy. It's like being promoted not because you're particularly good at your job, but because you've been showing up reliably for so long that everyone assumes you must know something about it. The physical decline that accompanies aging feels like a natural progression rather than a tragic loss, partly because you were never particularly impressive physically to begin with. Your hunting success rate remains roughly what it's always been, adequate for survival but unimpressive by professional standards. The difference is that now your limitations are attributed to age rather than incompetence, which somehow makes them more socially acceptable. Your daily routines have evolved to accommodate your changing physical capabilities without requiring you to admit that you're slowing down. You still patrol your territory, but at a more leisurely pace that you characterize as thorough surveillance, rather than walking slowly because everything hurts. Your hunting expeditions are planned around your energy levels rather than prey. Availability, a practical adjustment that you present as strategic thinking about optimal hunting conditions. The respect you've earned through longevity feels different from the respect accorded to obviously competent cheetahs. It's the kind of recognition given to institutions rather than individuals, valuable because of consistency and reliability rather than brilliance or innovation. You've become a fixture in your corner of the Serengeti, as permanent and unremarkable as the fever trees that provide shade during the hottest parts of the day. Your cubs have cubs of their own now, creating a second generation of cheetahs who seem to have inherited the family talent for creative mediocrity with interest compounded over time. These grandchildren treat you with the kind of casual affection usually reserved for furniture that's comfortable but not particularly valuable, which, you realize with some surprise, is exactly what you've always wanted to be. They climb on you during rest periods, use your tail as a toy, and generally regard you as a permanent feature of their landscape rather than a person with feelings and opinions about being used as playground equipment. The grandchildren are perfect small copies of every cheetah mistake you've ever made, but executed with the fearless enthusiasm that comes from not yet understanding that consequences exist. They attack everything with indiscriminate energy, including their own tails, their siblings, invisible threats, and your ears when you're trying to nap. Watching them is like observing your own youth played at double speed with the volume turned up. A reminder that incompetence is hereditary, but so is the eventual capacity to overcome it through persistent effort. Their hunting practice sessions provide entertainment that's both nostalgic and mildly horrifying. They stalk insects with the same intense concentration you once brought to gazelle hunting, and with roughly the same success rate. Their pouncing technique involves a lot of enthusiasm and very little accuracy, resulting in spectacular misses that send them tumbling through the grass with expressions of bewildered indignation. You recognize this performance intimately, having perfected it yourself during your own youth. You watch them make the same mistakes you made, but faster and with more enthusiasm, like students who've learned to fail efficiently. They trip over their own paws with artistic flair, chase their own shadows with dedicated incompetence, and approach every challenge with the kind of optimistic confidence that suggests they haven't yet figured out that the world is designed to humble the overconfident. This watching process is simultaneously heartwarming and exhausting, like being forced to relive your own adolescence from the perspective of someone who knows how embarrassing everything is going to be. Their parents, your children, look at you with new understanding during particularly chaotic family gatherings, apparently finally grasping why you always seemed so tired when they were young. The expression on their faces suggests they're experiencing the kind of revelation usually reserved for people who've just understood a joke that everyone else has been laughing at for years. They watch their own offspring with the same mixture of pride and bewildered exhaustion that you remember feeling, and occasionally catch your eye with looks that clearly communicate, "How did you survive this?" The generational divide in hunting philosophy becomes apparent during group expeditions where 3 generations attempt to coordinate their efforts. You favor the patient, conservative approach developed through years of learning to work within your limitations. Your children have developed a more confident but still practical style based on their inherited mediocrity tempered by actual competence. The grandchildren approach hunting with the kind of bold incompetence that makes everyone nervous, like watching someone juggle knives who's never seen juggling before but is very excited about the concept. These family hunting trips often resemble controlled disasters more than coordinated predatory expeditions. The grandchildren's enthusiasm disrupts carefully planned stalks, their energy level makes stealth impossible, and their tendency to chase anything that moves regardless of size or feasibility turns every hunt into an impromptu lesson in why patience is considered a virtue. You find yourself in the unexpected role of damage control specialist, trying to minimize the chaos while the actual adults attempt to accomplish something productive. The comfort of being taken for granted by family proves to be one of the unexpected pleasures of grandparenthood. You're no longer expected to be impressive or educational, you're simply expected to be present and tolerant of being climbed on. This role requires no special skills beyond the ability to remain conscious while small cheetahs use you as furniture, a job description that matches your current capabilities perfectly. Your relationship with the grandchildren develops its own rhythm, based on mutual incompetence and shared confusion about how the world works. They don't expect you to be fast or particularly effective at anything, and you don't expect them to be coordinated or capable of following simple instructions. This mutual lowering of expectations creates a comfortable space where everyone can fail without judgment, like a support group for the adequately gifted. The circle of life, it turns out, is less majestic and more repetitive than the documentaries suggest. You watch the same patterns play out with minor variations. The initial optimism about hunting prowess, the gradual realization that being a predator is harder than it looks, the slow accumulation of competence through persistent failure, and the eventual acceptance that being good enough is actually quite good. This cyclical nature of cheetah development provides a kind of comfort if you manage to figure it out eventually. Presumably they will too. Swift, now showing her own signs of age, watches these family gatherings with the satisfied air of someone whose long-term investment strategy has paid off. Her choice of you as a mate has produced offspring who inherited your survival instincts along with your coordination problems, resulting in children who are adequately equipped for long-term existence, even if they're not particularly impressive in the short term. She occasionally catches your eye during particularly chaotic moments and nods with the kind of approval usually reserved for people who've successfully completed a challenging home improvement project. The grandchildren's interaction with the wider cheetah community provides ongoing entertainment and occasional mortification. They approach other adult cheetahs with the fearless confidence of people who don't yet understand social hierarchies, resulting in interactions that range from amusing to diplomatically challenging. Your role during these encounters is primarily to apologize for their behavior while trying to extract them from situations that their enthusiasm has created but their inexperience can't resolve. Finding peace in the cyclical nature of mediocrity becomes one of the philosophical achievements of your later years. The realization that competence is temporary, adequacy is sustainable, and family is a long-term project rather than a short-term achievement provides a framework for understanding your own life's trajectory. You weren't meant to be exceptional, you were meant to be persistent enough to produce and raise the next generation of adequate cheetahs, ensuring that the gene pool retains its capacity for stubborn survival in the face of overwhelming indifference. You spend more time thinking now, which is either wisdom or the mental equivalent of a slow leak. The distinction becomes less important as you realize that both conditions produce the same result, a tendency to examine your life from angles that would have seemed pointless during your younger, more action-oriented years. Your thoughts drift toward questions that would have been impractical when you were busy trying to catch enough food to survive. Was it worth it? Did you matter? What's the point of being a predator if you're not particularly good at predating? These philosophical inquiries emerge during the long afternoon hours when the savannah is too hot for hunting and too bright for effective napping. You find yourself in a contemplative state that's part meditation and part mental wandering, like someone taking a scenic route to a destination they're not entirely sure they want to reach. The questions that occupy your aging mind are the kind that have no definitive answers but seem important to consider anyway, like intellectual exercises that keep your brain functional even when your body is gradually transitioning toward retirement. The first question, was it worth it, proves surprisingly complex when you actually think about it seriously. Worth implies some kind of cost-benefit analysis, and you're not entirely sure what metrics to use when evaluating a life that's been consistently adequate but rarely exceptional. You invested considerable time and energy in learning to be a functional cheetah, but the returns on that investment have been modest. Survival, reproduction, and the kind of quiet respect that comes from persisting long enough that people stop questioning your right to exist. On the other hand, the alternative to this life would have been no life at all, which makes the cost-benefit analysis considerably simpler. Any life that includes sufficient food, adequate shelter, successful reproduction, and enough interesting experiences to prevent boredom probably qualifies as worthwhile by reasonable standards. The fact that your life has also included family, friends, territory, and the satisfaction of gradual competence development suggests that worth it might be understating the case. The second question, did you matter, requires a different kind of analysis entirely. Your impact on the world has been subtle rather than dramatic, like the influence of a reliable supporting actor in a long-running television series. You've never been the star of your own story, but you've been a consistent presence in other people's stories, providing stability, occasional guidance, and the kind of dependable mediocrity that makes everyone else's achievements look more impressive by comparison. Your children have inherited your survival skills and your philosophical approach to existence, which means your influence will continue into the next generation even after you're gone. Your territory will be maintained by whoever inherits it, but it will retain the character you've given it, peaceful, predictable, and adequate for the basic requirements of cheetah life. Your contributions to the local cheetah community's stability have been modest but real, the kind of incremental improvements that accumulate over time to create positive change. The third question, what's the point of being a predator if you're not particularly good at predating, touches on issues of identity and purpose that become more pressing as physical capabilities decline. You've spent your entire life being technically classified as an apex predator while rarely feeling apex-like, which creates a certain cognitive dissonance about your role in the ecosystem. But you've gradually come to understand that predatory ecosystems need more than just the most efficient killers to function properly. They need predators who can survive lean times, who can find alternative food sources when primary prey is scarce, and who can raise offspring successfully even when conditions aren't optimal. Your particular combination of persistence, adaptability, and stubborn refusal to give up has contributed to the overall stability of the predator population, even if your individual hunting achievements have been unimpressive. The answers to these questions, when they come, are as unremarkable as everything else about your life. You were adequate, you survived, you contributed to the gene pool's capacity for persistent mediocrity in a world that needs both excellence and adequacy to function properly. In a world obsessed with excellence, you've proven that being good enough is, paradoxically, quite an achievement. This realization brings a kind of peace that you didn't expect to find. The pressure to be exceptional has gradually faded, replaced by satisfaction with being sufficient. You're not the fastest cheetah, the most successful hunter, or the most impressive predator, but you're a functional member of your ecosystem who's contributed to its stability and continuity. This might not be the legacy that ambitious young cheetahs dream of, but it's a legacy that has actual value in the real world, where survival and reproduction are the ultimate measures of success. Understanding your role in the larger ecosystem of adequacy provides a framework for appreciating achievements that might seem modest by dramatic standards, but are essential for long-term stability. The Serengeti needs cheetahs who can adapt to changing conditions, who can find ways to survive when resources are limited, and who can raise successful offspring even when they're not naturally gifted. Your life has been a demonstration that these qualities are valuable and sustainable, even if they don't make for exciting documentaries. The philosophy of enough that emerges from these contemplations isn't about settling for less than you deserve. It's about recognizing that adequacy is actually quite difficult to achieve and maintain over time. Being consistently good enough requires skills that are different from but no less valuable than the skills required for occasional excellence. Persistence, adaptability, realistic self-assessment, and the ability to find satisfaction in modest achievements are all qualities that contribute to long-term success, even when they don't produce short-term drama. Peace with being unremarkable in a remarkable world becomes the culminating achievement of your philosophical development. You've learned to appreciate the beauty of ordinary sunsets, the satisfaction of adequate meals, the comfort of familiar territory, and the quiet pleasure of watching your family grow and develop their own adequate approaches to existence. These might not be the kinds of achievements that inspire legends, but they're the kinds of achievements that make life sustainable and meaningful on a day-to-day basis. Your final successful hunt happens much like your first, through a combination of luck, persistence, and the prey animal's apparent death wish, creating a symmetry that feels either poetic or ironic, depending on your mood that day. The target is an elderly Thompson's gazelle that appears to be roughly your age in gazelle years, which makes this less a predator-prey encounter and more a meeting between two creatures who've survived long enough to be mutually surprised by their continued existence. The gazelle has the weathered look of someone who's been successfully avoiding cheetahs for several years and might be getting tired of the constant vigilance required for survival. Its movements suggest the kind of careful energy conservation that comes from understanding that every calorie spent on unnecessary activity is a calorie not available for escaping actual threats. You recognize this approach to existence immediately, having spent years perfecting your own version of efficient mediocrity. Your approach to this hunt incorporates everything you've learned about working within your limitations while accepting whatever opportunities the savannah chooses to provide. You move slowly enough to avoid attracting attention, patiently enough to wait for optimal conditions, and pragmatically enough to select a target that matches your current capabilities rather than your youthful ambitions. This represents the culmination of your hunting philosophy. Adequate effort directed toward achievable goals with realistic expectations about outcomes. The stalk phase proceeds with the kind of unhurried deliberation that comes from having nowhere important to be and no deadline for completion. You position yourself downwind of the gazelle, moving between available cover with the methodical patience of someone who's learned that rushing rarely improves outcomes and often makes everything more difficult. The gazelle continues its grazing routine, occasionally glancing up to scan for threats but showing no particular alarm about your presence. The critical moment arrives when you're approximately 15 feet from your target, close enough to attempt a successful pounce, far enough away to abort the attempt if conditions change. The gazelle looks up from its grazing and makes direct eye contact with you, creating one of those moments of mutual recognition that occasionally occurs between predator and prey. For several seconds, you regard each other across the grass with expressions that seem to communicate, "So, we're really doing this, are we?" The chase that follows unfolds with all the dramatic intensity of two elderly people disagreeing about the television remote. You accelerate toward the gazelle with whatever speed you can muster, which is sufficient but not spectacular. The gazelle begins its escape attempt with the kind of resigned efficiency that suggests it's going through the motions of fleeing more out of professional obligation than genuine optimism about survival. Neither of you runs with the desperate energy that typically characterizes predator-prey encounters. Instead, you both proceed with the measured pace of people who understand their own limitations and aren't particularly interested in exceeding them. This creates a chase scene that's notable more for its sustainability than its excitement, like watching a nature documentary filmed in slow motion by directors who've decided that drama is overrated. The gazelle's escape strategy involves running in a straight line toward the nearest patch of thick grass, apparently hoping that you'll become discouraged by the effort required to pursue it, rather than trying to outrun your maximum speed. This approach would be insulting if it weren't completely accurate. Your pursuit is indeed limited more by motivation than by physical capability, and the gazelle seems to understand this better than you do. About 50 yards into the chase, something unexpected happens. The gazelle simply stops running and looks at you with what might be relief. This decision appears to surprise both of you, as if the gazelle has just realized that being caught might be preferable to continuing the exhausting process of avoiding being caught. The expression on its face suggests someone who's just decided to stop fighting a battle they were never going to win anyway. You accept this gift with the gracious bewilderment of someone receiving an unexpected compliment, approaching the now stationary gazelle with the kind of cautious curiosity you might show toward a puzzle you're not entirely sure you're supposed to solve. The gazelle watches your approach with calm resignation, like someone waiting for a delayed appointment that they're not particularly looking forward to but can't reschedule. The actual kill is accomplished with as much dignity as you can manage under the circumstances, which isn't particularly dignified but represents your best effort at treating the situation with appropriate gravity. The gazelle's death is quick and peaceful, more like someone deciding to take a nap than like the dramatic conclusion to a life or death struggle. This seems fitting for both of you aged creatures who've earned the right to conclude things quietly rather than dramatically. The kill feeds you for 3 days, which seems appropriate, not too much, not too little, just exactly what you need to maintain your current level of adequate existence. The portion size feels like the universe's final comment on your hunting career, sufficient for your requirements, but not excessive enough to suggest that you've suddenly become more competent than you actually are. Other cheetahs witness this final triumph and nod with the kind of respectful approval usually reserved for someone who's managed to parallel park on the first try. Their reaction suggests recognition of adequate performance rather than amazement at exceptional achievement, which perfectly captures your entire approach to predatory life. You've successfully caught and killed prey, which fulfills the basic requirements of being a cheetah, and that accomplishment is worthy of acknowledgement, even if it's not particularly inspiring. The post-hunt period provides time for reflection on the circular nature of your predatory career. Your first successful hunt was an accident involving a gazelle with coordination problems. Your last successful hunt involves a gazelle with motivational problems. Both achievements required more luck than skill, both surprised you more than they probably should have, and both provided exactly the amount of food necessary for survival without excess. This symmetry feels like the kind of narrative closure that would be heavy-handed in fiction but seems perfectly natural in real life, where patterns repeat themselves with variations that make them interesting without making them dramatically different. You've begun and ended your hunting career with modest successes that accurately represent your overall approach to being a predator. Adequate effort producing sufficient results through persistence rather than excellence. The satisfaction of going out on a minor high note proves more durable than you expected. You've concluded your active hunting career with a successful kill that demonstrates your continued competence, even as your physical capabilities decline. This represents the kind of dignified conclusion that allows you to transition into full retirement without feeling like you're giving up due to failure rather than choice. You don't die dramatically. There's no epic battle with superior predators, no tragic sacrifice to save family members, no meaningful last words whispered to grieving offspring who gather around to receive final wisdom. Instead, you simply wear out, like a comfortable pair of shoes that's finally walked too many miles and whose owner has gradually stopped noticing that they're no longer providing adequate support. The process is so gradual and undramatic that you're not entirely sure when it begins, though you eventually become certain about when it ends. The transition from alive and functional to alive but declining happens with the same subtle persistence that characterized your entire approach to existence. Your joints ache more consistently, your energy levels drop more predictably, and your appetite decreases in ways that suggest your body is beginning to prioritize different kinds of efficiency than the ones that served you during your active years. These changes accumulate like sediment, each one insignificant by itself but collectively creating a new landscape of limitations. Your final months settle into a routine that emphasizes comfort over achievement, rest over activity, and accepting what each day offers rather than demanding what you want from it. You spend more time in shaded areas during the heat of the day, more time napping during periods when you once would have been active, and more time simply existing without feeling obligated to accomplish anything in particular. This represents the culmination of your lifelong philosophy of adequacy. You're now adequately alive rather than actively alive, and that seems perfectly appropriate. The other cheetahs in your territory begin to treat you with the kind of gentle deference usually reserved for valuable antiques, still functional but requiring careful handling and not suitable for heavy use. Their interactions with you become increasingly brief and considerate, like people visiting someone in a nursing home who understand that conversation should focus on comfort rather than challenging topics. This social transition feels natural rather than patronizing, recognition of your changing status rather than judgment about your declining capabilities. Your family adjusts to your new limitations with the practical acceptance that characterizes most cheetah responses to changing circumstances. Your children visit more frequently but stay for shorter periods, checking on your condition without making demands on your energy. Your grandchildren continue to treat you as furniture, but furniture that requires gentler handling, like a favorite chair that's developed a wobble but is still comfortable enough to keep using. Swift, now dealing with her own age-related challenges, spends increasing amounts of time near you without feeling obligated to maintain conversation or engage in activities. Your relationship has evolved into a comfortable parallel existence where you share space and occasionally acknowledge each other's presence without requiring interaction to validate the connection. This represents the kind of long-term partnership that's based on mutual accommodation rather than ongoing romance, practical, sustainable, and quietly satisfying. One morning, you don't get up to survey your territory. This isn't a conscious decision so much as a recognition that the effort required to stand up and walk around seems disproportionate to any benefit you might derive from patrolling boundaries that aren't under threat and observing conditions that aren't likely to change significantly based on your observations. You remain in your preferred resting spot, watching the world proceed with its daily routine while you participate as an observer rather than an active participant. The world continues without pause, barely noting your absence. Prey animals remain cautious, predators follow their routines, and the seasons shift in their ancient rhythm. This ongoing pattern doesn't diminish your life, it affirms it. The ecosystem's stability is not proof that you were meaningless, but that you were part of something greater, something self-sustaining. Your legacy is modest but real. Offspring who inherited your talent for stubborn survival, a peaceful territory still functional under their care, and a reputation for being reliably unremarkable. You were a footnote in the Serengeti's story, but footnotes matter. They provide the context, continuity, and quiet foundation upon which the grander narratives depend. From the perspective of a life completed, your achievements reveal a quiet, durable success. You reached maturity, raised capable offspring, maintained a stable territory, and supported your ecosystem not through brilliance, but through steady consistency. These acts, though unremarkable to most, are the true marks of evolutionary success. Your life was built on persistent adequacy, realistic self-assessment, and sustainable effort. Over decades, this approach proved more valuable than occasional excellence. You didn't seek recognition, you ensured survival. Even in death, your legacy blends into the landscape. The grass grows over your grave without ceremony, a fitting end for someone who worked within the system rather than trying to reshape it. Nearby, a young cheetah clumsily learns to hunt. They will fail, adapt, and eventually discover what you knew. That survival depends less on brilliance than on learning to be reliably adequate. The cycle continues. New generations will make the same mistakes, follow the same path, and carry forward the same strategy, not flashy, but effective. You were never meant to be legendary. But in a world that often celebrates the exceptional, your steady, stubborn sufficiency was exactly what it needed.